Hancock Park, Los Angeles, January 1949. Nat King Cole stood outside Wilton Place Elementary School with his two daughters, Cookie, age 7, Carol, who everyone called Natalie, age 8. The school was beautiful, well-maintained building, large playground, excellent reputation. It was 5 minutes from their house, walking distance, the neighborhood school. Nat had just purchased their home in Hancock Park 2 months earlier in December 1948. The cross burning had happened shortly after, but they'd stayed. This was their neighborhood now. These were their property taxes. This was their children's school, or so he thought. Inside the school office, Principal Margaret Henderson, a white woman in her 50s, sat behind her desk with uncomfortable formality. School board representative Thomas Crawford, also white, mid-40s, stood beside her. "Mr. Cole, we appreciate you coming in. However, after careful consideration, the school board has determined that enrollment of your daughters at Wilton Place Elementary would not be appropriate at this time." Nat looked at Crawford. "What does not appropriate mean? They live in this district. We own property here. We pay taxes that fund this school." Crawford cleared his throat. "It's a matter of educational environment. Other parents have expressed concerns that the presence of Negro students might disrupt the classroom dynamic." "Disrupt how? They're 7 and 8 years old. They want to go to school. We have to consider the comfort of our existing families." "The comfort of your existing families doesn't override my daughter's right to attend their neighborhood school." Henderson spoke, trying to soften it. "There are excellent schools for Negro children across town. We can provide you with a list." "Across town? How far across town?" "About 45 minutes, perhaps an hour depending on traffic." Nat gestured toward the window. "This school is 5 minutes from our house. My daughters could walk here. You're telling me they have to be driven an hour each way to a different school because other parents are uncomfortable?" Crawford's tone became firmer. "Mr. Cole, the school board has discretion in enrollment decisions. We have determined that your daughter's enrollment would not serve the best interests of this educational community." Before we dive into how Nat King Cole paid the same property taxes as his white neighbors in Hancock Park, but his daughters Cookie and Natalie were denied enrollment at the local elementary school for 2 years, how they had to be driven past that same school every day to reach the black school across town they were allowed to attend, and how this de facto segregation in a northern city exposed how racism operated through discretion rather than explicit Jim Crow laws. Let me ask, where are you watching from? Drop a comment, because this story about educational segregation is as relevant in 2026 as it was in 1949. The situation was absurd on multiple levels. Los Angeles Unified School District had no official segregation policy. On paper, schools were integrated. The district officially opposed racial discrimination, but individual school boards had discretion over enrollment, and that discretion was used to maintain racial boundaries. Wilton Place Elementary's school board met privately in January 1949 to discuss the Cole enrollment request. The meeting minutes obtained years later revealed their reasoning. "While we have no formal policy excluding Negro students, we must consider the concerns of existing families who have chosen Hancock Park for its character and values. The enrollment of the Cole children, while legally permissible, would fundamentally alter the school environment in ways that may not serve our educational mission." Translation: we can't legally ban them, but we can refuse them through administrative discretion. The board voted 5-2 to deny enrollment. The 2 dissenting votes came from members who argued that denying neighborhood children based on race was indefensible, but they were outvoted. Nat received a formal letter, polite, professional, devastating. "Dear Mr. Cole, after careful consideration, the Wilton Place Elementary School Board has determined that enrollment spaces for the upcoming academic year have been allocated to students currently on our waiting list. We encourage you to explore alternative educational options that may better serve your family's needs." No mention of race, no explicit discrimination, just bureaucratic language that achieved the same result as a whites-only sign. Nat knew exactly what it meant. So did Maria. They had to find another school. A school that would accept their daughters, which meant a black school, which meant across town. They enrolled Cookie and Natalie at a predominantly black elementary school in a different neighborhood, 45 minutes to an hour away depending on traffic. Every morning Maria would drive them, past Wilton Place Elementary, past the school that was walking distance from their house, past the playground where their white neighbors' children played, to drive across the city to a school that would accept them. The commute took nearly 2 hours out of every day, an hour there, an hour back, time that could have been spent on homework, play, rest. White children in Hancock Park walked to school, got home quickly, had their afternoons free. Cookie and Natalie spent hours in the car because a school board exercised its discretion. The emotional impact on the children was significant. They understood even at 7 and 8 what was happening. Natalie later recalled, "I'd see other children walking to the school near our house. I'd ask my mother why we couldn't go there too. She'd explain that the school didn't want us. I didn't fully understand it then, but I understood enough to know we were being rejected." That's what segregation does to children. Makes them understand rejection before they fully understand why. Cookie, the younger daughter, struggled more. She wanted to walk to school like other kids in the neighborhood, didn't understand why a car ride was necessary. The explanations, age-appropriate as Maria tried to make them, still came down to, because you're black and they don't want you. How do you explain that to a 7-year-old without damaging her understanding of her own worth? The property tax situation added insult to injury. Nat paid the same property tax rate as every other Hancock Park homeowner. His taxes funded Wilton Place Elementary's operations, teacher salaries, facilities, programs, but his children couldn't attend. He was funding a school that rejected his daughters. The tax assessment didn't care about race, neither did the collection process. The city was happy to take Nat's money, just not happy to educate his children with it. That's taxation without representation. Paying for services you're denied access to, contributing to a system that excludes you. Nat considered fighting it legally. He had resources, he could hire lawyers, challenge the school board's decision, but legal fights take time, and while lawyers argue, children miss school or attend schools far from home. The immediate need was education. The fight could happen simultaneously, but Cookie and Natalie needed to be in a classroom now. So they enrolled across town and Nat began a quieter pressure campaign. Not lawsuits, not public confrontation, strategic conversations, calling in favors, using his celebrity carefully. He reached out to contacts in the Los Angeles Unified School District Central Administration, made them aware of what Wilton Place Elementary was doing, pointed out the contradiction between district policy and school board practice. He spoke with other black professionals who'd experienced similar rejections, built a coalition, documented the pattern. He had journalists, friendly ones, careful ones, look into the story, not to create scandal, but to create awareness. To make clear that this was happening in Los Angeles, not Mississippi, that northern racism was real, just less explicit. The pressure worked slowly, over months, through 1949 and into 1950. Some school board members began to feel uncomfortable with the scrutiny. The district administration didn't want bad publicity. The contradiction between stated policy and actual practice was becoming too visible. By late 1950, the resistance started weakening. A few board members who'd voted against enrollment began reconsidering. The political cost of continued exclusion was rising. In early 1951, nearly 2 years after the initial rejection, the school board quietly reversed its decision. No announcement, no apology, just a letter to Nat informing him that enrollment spaces were now available for his daughters at Wilton Place Elementary. Cookie was 9, Natalie was 10. They'd spent 2 years being driven across town, 2 years of their childhood dealing with a commute that shouldn't have existed. When they finally enrolled at Wilton Place, the transition was awkward. They were the first black students. Some parents were hostile. Some children were cruel, parroting their parents' racism. But some teachers were welcoming. Some students were kind. The school didn't collapse. The disruption that parents had feared didn't materialize. Education continued. Cookie and Natalie were just students, learning math and reading like everyone else. The only difference was their skin color, which was the only reason they'd been excluded in the first place. The educational environment argument was code, the concerns were racism, the discretion was discrimination with bureaucratic language. None of the catastrophic predictions came true. The school functioned normally, white children weren't harmed, academic standards didn't decline. All justifications were revealed as excuses for maintaining racial boundaries, but the damage was done to Cookie and Natalie. 2 years of understanding they weren't wanted. 2 years of commuting past the school they couldn't attend. 2 years of their childhood shaped by adult racism. You don't get those years back. The eventual enrollment doesn't erase the earlier rejection. The harm accumulates. Maria Cole was furious about the whole situation. In private conversations years later, she didn't hold back. We owned property there. We paid taxes there. Nat was famous, successful, exactly the kind of neighbor they should have wanted. But our daughters couldn't go to the neighborhood school because white parents didn't want black children in the classroom. That's not Southern racism. That's Los Angeles. That's the North. That's what people don't understand. Segregation existed everywhere, just with different mechanisms. She was right. The North liked to feel superior to the South, pointed to lack of Jim Crow laws as evidence of progressive values, but de facto segregation through discretion. Neighborhood preference and administrative decisions achieved similar results without explicit laws. Southern segregation was honest in its racism. Whites' only signs were clear. You knew where you stood. Northern segregation was dishonest, claimed to oppose discrimination while practicing it through bureaucratic mechanisms, made you prove you were being discriminated against while maintaining plausible deniability. In some ways, that was more insidious, harder to fight. Harder to prove, easier to dismiss as individual decisions rather than systematic policy. The Hancock Park situation was part of broader LA patterns. Black families in white neighborhoods consistently faced educational barriers through capacity issues, district boundaries, waiting lists. White children automatically enrolled, black children faced barriers, delays. Rejections. It took sustained pressure to break through, school by school, case by case, no systematic reform. Nat's celebrity helped. The pressure he could bring, media attention, political connections, resources, made Wilton Place Elementary's exclusion harder to maintain. But what about black families without those resources? Without celebrity, without connections? They just dealt with it, sent their children to distant schools, absorbed the commute. Paid property taxes for schools their children couldn't attend. The injustice Nat experienced was multiplied across thousands of families who didn't have his platform to fight back. Systematic discrimination didn't need to exclude everyone perfectly, just make resistance difficult enough that most couldn't manage it. The few who could fight might win individual battles, but the system remained intact for everyone else. By the mid-1950s, some Los Angeles schools were slowly integrating, partly because of legal pressure, partly because demographic changes made segregation harder to maintain, partly because the contradiction between stated values and actual practice was becoming too visible. But the progress was slow, grudging, incomplete, and it came too late for Cookie and Natalie's early elementary years. The experience shaped both daughters. Natalie became acutely aware that racism worked through bureaucratic exclusion, not just violent confrontation, northern school boards with discretion, not just southern sheriffs. Cookie was younger but understood that parents' success, family wealth, father's fame couldn't protect from racial rejection. Success gave resources to fight but didn't eliminate the need to fight, and fighting as children left marks. The Hancock Park school situation also revealed something about how racism policed boundaries. It wasn't enough that black people were excluded from white neighborhoods. Even when they broke through that barrier, as Nat did by purchasing the house, other barriers were erected. You could live there, but your children couldn't attend school there, or they could eventually attend, but only after a fight. And the fight itself was the point, making inclusion difficult enough to discourage others from trying. Every barrier Nat overcame demonstrated that the barriers were artificial. He could afford the house. His children could succeed in the school. His family wasn't a disruption to the neighborhood. But every barrier also demonstrated the depth of resistance to integration, even when the arguments against it were obviously false, even when the black family was exceptionally qualified, even when the exclusion was clearly unjust, the resistance remained. That's what systemic racism looked like, not individual prejudice that could be overcome through personal excellence, but structural barriers that required constant fighting to overcome, even when you had every qualification. The eventual enrollment obscures the real story. 2 years of exclusion, daily commutes past the school they couldn't attend, property taxes paid for services denied, bureaucratic racism dressed in administrative language. The victory shouldn't have been necessary. The real measure of injustice isn't whether it could be overcome with resources and pressure, but that it existed at all, that discretion could exclude children from education based on race. Los Angeles Unified School District never apologized for Wilton Place Elementary's exclusion. never acknowledged their discretion system-enabled discrimination. The system changed gradually over decades, forced by court cases and federal pressure, not institutional acknowledgement. Like Capitol Records, hotels, and the IRS, institutions quietly stopped practices when too costly or visible. No accountability, no acknowledgement, just moving on, leaving families to carry the memory and impact. Cookie and Natalie Cole attended Wilton Place Elementary. Eventually, after a fight, after 2 years of exclusion, after daily commutes past the school where they should have been enrolled all along, they got an education, but they also got an education in how racism works through bureaucracy, how exclusion operates through discretion, how their father's success couldn't protect them from rejection. That's not just about the 1940s and 1950s. That's about how systemic barriers operate, how access is controlled, how resistance is structured to be exhausting enough to discourage challenges. Nat King Cole paid property taxes in Hancock Park. His daughters were denied enrollment at the local elementary school for 2 years based on race, using bureaucratic discretion that allowed plausible deniability of explicit discrimination. That's the story, simple. Documented and largely forgotten except by the family who lived it. The school still exists, Wilton Place Elementary, still serving the Hancock Park neighborhood, integrated now because families like the Coles fought to make it so. But the integration didn't happen automatically, didn't happen because of institutional goodwill, happened because Nat Cole had resources to fight and used them, and even with those resources, it took 2 years, 2 years of his daughter's childhood. 2 years they spent being told they didn't belong in the school 5 minutes from their house. That's what educational segregation looked like in Los Angeles. That's what northern racism looked like. That's what discretion achieved when it was used to maintain racial boundaries. Wilton Place Elementary School rejected Nat King Cole's daughters. Then, after 2 years of pressure, accepted them. Both facts are true. Both are part of the school's history. One shows the racism. The other shows it could be overcome. Both matter, and the gap between them, those 2 years, held the childhood of two girls who deserved better from the start.